Okay, well, here we are back on the blog. We're going to run this principle, the seventh principle. I know it's not in order, but according to this book that I'm taking these titles of these principles out of, this information isn't all from this book, but I don't want to take from something that's not credit where it's due. And like I've said before, this book, The 5,000-Year Leap, got the Principles of Freedom 101, which is put out by where's the name? The National Center for Constitutional Studies. It's a very good book. Got some good principles in it. And I'm just going down, taking these headings off of their list that they gave as far as principles, and we're just discussing some of those things. A lot of this information has come out of the book, and some of it isn't. Some of it's just from my own. I feel like that because of a misunderstanding of most of these principles is the reason why we've deviated from the realities of what we need to be operating in this life and in this world, and not only in our government, but in our things of the church and the things of order within a good society. Okay, the seventh principle, it applies to the things that's going on today with our politicians out here running around trying to tell us, how we need to live, and explain to us that, how they're going to take care of everything for us. It says the proper role of government is not to protect the equal, or the proper role of government is rather to protect fought because we just celebrated the Independence Day, the 4th of July. I know I got off on a rant here last week on the nonsense that's going on, but that is all part of this mass bombardment of information that's been coming to try and sway us from these basic principles. You see, the basic element they say in the political realm that this great inequality in the distribution of wealth in our nation today. That is so ridiculous, because this whole nation is established on you are rewarded for your efforts and your work. And if you want to be very successful and very wealthy, then you do what it takes in order to become very successful and very wealthy. The government does not have the right to take from the person that has earned that and give it to somebody that is not. And in this book of the principles, it uses the analogy that I'm going to steal from, not word for word verbatim, but basically the ideas of it, because there's no better example. We have a situation of law in our nation here, and the reason why we operate in laws is to protect the rights of the individual. So we're going to take this principle of taken from the rich and given to the poor, and we're going to apply it down to where we can understand. We have two neighbors, or three neighbors actually, and the neighbor on the right side of the center neighbor, he has two automobiles, and the neighbor on the left side of the center neighbor, he doesn't have any automobiles. So we'll say the middle neighbor decides to go to the neighbor on the right and take his car and give it to the neighbor on the left. Well, that's all good-hearted and well, and his intentions are good and all that good stuff, right? Well, what would happen if we was to do that today in our society? That person would be arrested for stealing, would he not? Because the rights of the individual with the two cars have been violated. He stole his property from him, correct? Simple law, simple basic deal. But now if the center neighbor, he goes and petitions to the governor of the state or the city or whatever principality you want to list, and he says, hey, it's not right that this guy doesn't have a car, and he's got two cars, he's not using that car, so you should be able to take that car from that guy and give it to the other guy. Now what just happened to the guy with two cars is right. See, he has no recourse. He cannot go back and get his car back, get his property back, because the state has assumed that authority and they have taken over it. Where In the first scenario, we have the law enforcement, we have the police department, we have all of these other avenues that we can go and rectify the situation because we've been violated. But if the state is the one that's going through and doing these things, then there is no recourse, and therefore the rights have been violated. So if this is allowed to go on, where does it stop? See, this is the problem. This is what was going on in Europe when the Revolutionary War broke out. The king was seizing the property of the farms and the different things around him, and he was trying to, create an equal environment for everybody involved. And as a result, there was all this chaos and mayhem, and they were going broke. If you recall, during the Revolutionary War, what broke the war out was the King of England was going broke, and he was trying to siphon monies that he needed off of the Americas to pay for. He was using the excuse to pay for the debt that break us out of the French Revolutionary War. But the reality of it was the king's finances were in destitute, and he needed an income. And so he was fleecing the Americas in order to subsidize the shortages of the finance that was going on in Europe because they were depleting, they were failing. Part of the reason why the United States was successful in breaking loose is because of the burdens of finances and the pressure that was on the European kingdom at the time. They were in the midst of a collapse because their socialist tyrant economy and kingdom was in trouble. We broke loose with a reward for individual strength, individual power, individual moving forward. And now, yes, we have multi-billionaires that have been successful. We have people that are not successful. But you know what? We have a system in place that takes care of the necessities of life. And you know what? It's called the laws of God. If we follow the laws of God, this is why our forefathers said that our government would only survive with a moral, ethical people. Because if we do not operate under the principles of God and take care of the needs of our fellow man willfully and voluntarily, then we will have the violation of the law of God in our society. And because of the violation of the law of God in our society becomes more corrupt, it becomes more heinous, and it becomes more selfish driven, because the only way that we can operate in a successful society is if we have concern and compassion for our fellow man in the deeds and the things that we are doing. And after we willfully give to our fellow man who is in need, and we have requirements for that he gets around and he produces and he becomes a productive member of our society, and then he prospers so that he can give. The Bible says that a man should work. In fact, the Bible says if a man stole, he should steal no more, and he should put his hands to work so that he will have an abundance to give to those that have lack. You see, that is the whole purpose of the prosperity. And as our country bloomed, the first half of this country, that was the condition. It was until the generation of the 1900s where we started putting the social welfare systems in place that our Constitution, by the way, is absolutely against. If we would go back to following our Constitution, we would not have this conditioning in our society that we have today of the thought process. And I can see that I am fast running out of time again. These little 10-minute segments are just not long enough. But we will do our best to stay within them and get these things going. But you see, the principle of our government is to protect the liberties of the individual, not to protect equal stuff, equal finance. That's not the thing. We got to do that on our own. And so until next time, I will see you on the blog.